My name's Jake Harlan, and I built that cabin with my bare hands. Nestled in the woods of Crescent Valley, it wasn't just a wooden structure surrounded by pine and oak trees. It was my sanctuary, my history, and the only place that ever truly felt like home. Built 20 years ago on inherited land, far from the chaos of the city, my cabin stood tall and strong. Until the day the HOA showed up, waving papers and barking orders. You see, my grandfather bought this land before World War II. It was 1949 when he planted the flag, so to speak, and started building out what was then a modest hunting cabin. He taught my dad how to fell trees, how to mill logs by hand, and how to build a home that could outlast storms, time, and bureaucracy. That knowledge passed down to me like sacred scripture. I grew up out here, learned to fish in Crescent Lake, learned to shoot cans off a log rail with my first .22. This land was more than dirt and trees. It was blood and legacy. As a teenager, I spent summers with a hammer in my hand and sawdust in my lungs. I helped my father patch up the roof, lay down new floorboards, and rebuild the chimney after a brutal winter storm collapsed half of it. We didn't call contractors or look up how-to videos. We did it all ourselves, just like Grandpa would have wanted. By the time I hit 25, I had inherited the land, built onto the original structure, and added a solar rig, a well, and a septic system that made me fully self-sufficient. Over the decades, the nearby city expanded, like most cities do. Developers smelled opportunity and started slicing up the valley like a Thanksgiving turkey. In the beginning, they left us alone. Who cared about a crusty old cabin and a chunk of woodland way out in the boonies? But then came the tech boom. With it came gentrifiers, people looking to escape the noise of urban sprawl but unwilling to let go of their creature comforts and control-freak tendencies. That's when Crescent Pines came to life. It started slow, one developer, then another. They bought up plots, paved roads, and laid down sod like it was some kind of green carpet covering up decades of wilderness. Then came the HOA. The moment they formed, everything changed. First it was signs, then the gates, then the rules. So many rules you'd think they were running a military academy instead of a housing community. Now let me be clear. I'm not part of any HOA. My land was never zoned within their boundaries. The property records proved that my acreage stood independent, unincorporated, and unbound. But that didn't stop them from trying to strong-arm their influence over everything around them. It started with passive-aggressive letters slipped into my mailbox. I remember the first one vividly. It had a gold emblem on the envelope and used thick, perfumed paper like they were announcing a royal ball instead of sending threats. Dear Mr. Harlan, your rustic structure does not conform to the architectural standards of the Crescent Pines community. We kindly suggest upgrading your exterior to match the community guidelines. I laughed, tossed it in the fireplace. The second one wasn't so friendly. You are in violation of Section 13B, unauthorized structural additions. Failure to comply may result in legal action. What structural additions? My outhouse? My chicken coop? The damn windmill I installed to go off-grid? They kept coming, each one a little bolder, a little nastier, until the day a black SUV rolled up my gravel driveway and parked like they owned the place. Out stepped a man who looked like he hadn't touched dirt in 20 years. Armani suit, polished loafers, clipboard under his arm. Chad Morton. Mr. Harlan, he said, voice clipped. You're in violation of Crescent Pines' Architectural Compliance Code Section 14A. Unauthorized construction, non-approved dwelling. I just blinked at him. You mean my cabin? The one I built with permits on my land? That cabin? He nodded, smug. We recently redrew the HOA boundaries. As of last month, your parcel falls within Crescent Pines' jurisdiction. According to the bylaws, all structures must comply. I looked him dead in the eye. You can't just redraw boundaries and declare ownership. He smiled. Oh, we didn't declare ownership. We passed a motion, voted. It's filed with the county clerk. Sure enough, 3 days later, I received a certified letter. You Have 72 hours to dismantle and remove your non-compliant structure or face legal action, including demolition and cleanup fees. 72 hours. After decades of peace and self-reliance, I was being told by a bunch of bored suburbanites to tear down my home. They thought they could bully me into submission. They thought I'd panic, pack up, and run. That was the moment. Something shifted deep inside me. I wasn't afraid. I was furious. Because what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that while they were sipping kombucha and holding potluck board meetings, I'd been planning my own kind of long game. You see, while they were busy buying homes and throwing up fences, I was quietly buying land. Years ago, after a messy court case involving a property boundary dispute, one I won, by the way, I realized just how lucrative owning land could be. Not houses, not buildings, the ground beneath it all. So I started buying surrounding lots. Not under my name directly, of course. I used a trust. Harlan Holdings, LLC, quiet, legal, and almost invisible. And 2 years ago, I made my biggest purchase, a holding company that leased the very land Crescent Pines was built on. That's right. These so-called homeowners didn't own the soil beneath their million-dollar homes. They leased it from a company I secretly controlled. A 99-year lease signed in the early 2000s with renewal clauses tied to compliance. And guess what? Their boundary stunt, redrawing lines without legal right, violated that lease. So I called up my attorney, Mallory Quinn, a red-headed firebrand who made her name gutting banks in foreclosure cases. I gave her the lease documents, the notices, from the HOA and the new maps. She read them once and grinned. "They screwed themselves, Jake." "Good," I said. "Prepare the notices." 3 days later, while Chad was likely celebrating what he thought was a clean win, every resident of Crescent Pines received a hand-delivered letter, notice of lease renegotiation, due to Crescent Pines Homeowners Association's unauthorized expansion and jurisdictional overreach onto exempted parcels. The master lease is now subject to full renegotiation. Effective immediately, the land lease fee for each occupied residential parcel will increase from $1 per year to $1,500 per month. The community went ballistic. They called emergency meetings. They filed complaints with the county. They even tried to report me for harassment. But the paperwork was solid, ironclad. Their homes now sat on land they no longer had a valid lease for. They weren't just in breach, they were in default. The HOA tried to spin it. Chad released a community memo claiming it was a clerical error, that negotiations were underway, that no one should panic. Then came the kicker. Mallory filed a lawsuit in district court for retroactive rent and damages. We asked for $2.3 million in back penalties and lease infractions. The judge granted a hearing within 2 weeks. At the hearing, I showed up in boots and flannel. Chad showed up in a 3-piece suit, looking smug. He didn't look so smug when the judge read the lease aloud and said, "Mr. Harlan is well within his rights. The HOA's actions are not only inappropriate, they are illegal. Mr. Harlan, do you wish to proceed with eviction?" I let that hang in the air. "No," I said slowly. "Not yet. I just want them to understand who really owns this land." The rent tripled that day. Enforcement began that week. Some families begged me for leniency. I granted it to a few, the elderly, the veterans, the ones who apologized. But Chad, the HOA board, I made sure their invoices included every penny, and my cabin, still standing, stronger than ever. They gave me 72 hours. I gave them monthly reminders of who really runs Crescent Valley. 2 weeks after the rent hike hit their mailboxes, Crescent Pines turned from a pristine utopia into a simmering war zone of denial, finger-pointing, and whispered apologies. You'd think a group of adults, many of them wealthy tech transplants, and self-described community leaders, would be able to handle a sudden spike in their lease payments with a shred of dignity. But no. Most of them reacted the way overgrown children do when told no for the first time in their adult lives. HOA, Meetings exploded into chaos. I knew because a kindly veteran named Walter, who lived on Lot 47 and had seen enough combat in Vietnam to spot a bad leader from miles away, started secretly recording the meetings and sending me the audio. He didn't do it out of spite. He did it because, in his words, "Jake, I've seen insurgencies fall quicker than this clown council. They don't have a clue what they're doing." Chad was spiraling. His emails to the HOA members dripped with panic masquerading as confidence. He hosted a community town hall where he tried to explain that I had no legal right to enforce a lease renegotiation and that he was working with the county to get it sorted. But by then, half the residents had done their own research and realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't bluffing. The land they built their million-dollar smart homes on, it was mine. And worse, they were all in default. Chad had tried to play king. I reminded him he didn't even own the board. To drive the message home, I made a subtle move. I had a surveying crew show up at 6 a.m. on a Thursday and mark every lot line with 6-foot iron rods and bright orange boundary tape. I also had my lawyer serve eviction notices to 5 properties, the 5 owned by the current HOA board members. No legal tricks, just quiet, procedural dominance. Walter sent me another message after that meeting. Chad looked like he saw a ghost. Good job, son. But I wasn't done. I'd spent decades off-grid, quiet, and out of sight. I liked it that way. But when you threaten my home, you wake up the part of me that doesn't just survive in the woods. I thinks like the woods. Patient, strategic, and absolutely unforgiving. Chad, on the other hand, panicked and launched a PR campaign. Flyers began circulating around Crescent Pines with ridiculous accusations. "This man is extorting us. Jake Harlan is a danger to the community. Boycott the rent. Resist tyranny." I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. A community of people who moved out here to escape society now wanted to form a resistance movement against a guy living in a cabin who owned the dirt under their granite countertops? Sure, go ahead. I encouraged it, because every time they moved, they gave me more rope to hang them with. That's when Chad did something unbelievably stupid. He hosted a protest. Not a real one. A media protest. He invited a couple of local news outlets, brought in a few paid shouters, some college kids with megaphones and tie-dye shirts, and held a press conference on the cul-de-sac in front of Lot 12. I watched it online, shaking my head. He called me a rogue squatter, claimed I was exploiting a loophole, and accused me of threatening community values. Community values? You mean like bulldozing people's cabins without consent? Then, on live television, Chad walked over to my survey stakes, grabbed one, and dramatically pulled it out of the ground like he was King Arthur with a sword. "We won't be intimidated," he shouted. Big mistake, because those markers were legally placed by a licensed surveyor. Tampering with them? That's called destruction of official survey equipment, a criminal offense. So I did what any smart landowner would do. I filed charges. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy handed Chad a court summons on camera. Walter called me, howling with laughter. "That boy thought he was doing Shakespeare in the park, and now he's facing a fine and 6 months probation?" Meanwhile, I had other plans brewing. You see, my grandfather didn't just build a cabin. He also built a bunker, a real one. During the Cold War, he poured concrete and steel rebar into the hillside and created a fallout shelter with 2 exits, its own ventilation, and enough storage to survive for a year. Most folks thought it was a myth, but I knew the truth. I'd kept it up, renovated it, and converted part of it into a secure data archive, complete with surveillance feeds, legal, records, and a communications hub. You want to play HOA games? I'll play bunker chess. So while the HOA was fumbling in public, I was watching everything. I tapped into public traffic cams, installed a drone overflight system using solar-charged quadcopters, and even set up sound. Traps in the woods to detect unauthorized trespassers. I wasn't just prepared, I was 5 moves ahead, and sure enough, they took the bait. One night, a black SUV parked half a mile down the road, and 3 men in dark hoodies hiked up my trail. I caught them on infrared before they even reached my fence line. They had bolt cutters and flashlights, classic amateur hour stuff, probably hired goons from a security firm. I triggered the perimeter alarm, not loud, but just enough to activate the ground lights and send a deep, bassy hum through the trees. My speakers started blaring recordings of wolves howling and gun clicks. The trespassers froze like scared rabbits, panicked, and ran back into the woods. I watched it all on a monitor in my underground bunker, sipping tea. The next day, I sent a copy of the footage to Mallory. Within 48 hours, we had a restraining order filed against the HOA board for orchestrating an attempted break-in. Publicly, I said nothing. Privately, I increased every board member's rent by another 30%. They were cracking. Some residents began siding with me. A young couple on Lot 22 baked me a pie and left it on my porch with a note. "We didn't sign up for this HOA hell. Thanks for standing your ground." An elderly woman, Mrs. Dobbins, walked her dog up to my gate and said, "If you ever run for mayor of this place, you've got my vote." I wasn't interested in politics. I just wanted my land back in peace. But if they forced me to become the warlord of Crescent Valley, so be it. Things finally hit the boiling point when Chad tried one last desperate move. He filed a lawsuit against me, personally, alleging harassment, extortion, and psychological distress. Mallory showed up at the hearing with a binder thicker than a dictionary. Every email, every recorded meeting, every trespass incident, every lease clause. When the judge saw it all, he didn't even let Chad finish his opening statement. "Case dismissed," the judge said. "And Mr. Morton, consider yourself lucky. Mr. Harlan hasn't pursued criminal charges." Mallory didn't smile. She stared Chad down like a lioness. "Not yet," she whispered loud enough for the room to hear. It was over, but just to seal the deal, I made one final move. I hosted a community barbecue, right there on the open land between the woods and the Crescent Pines boundary line. I invited everyone, residents, local media, even the sheriff. Free food, country music, lawn chairs, and open dialogue. I stood up, raised a glass of lemonade, and said, "I'm not your enemy. I'm your neighbor. You don't have to like me. But you do have to respect that this land has a history deeper than your bylaws. I'm not moving. I'm not selling. And if you think you can bully me, ask Chad how that worked out." People applauded Chad. He didn't show up. Word was he resigned from the HOA the day before and sold his house at a loss. Moved to Florida, Crescent Pines. They eventually voted to dissolve the HOA. Some tried to form a new, friendlier version. I stayed out of it, so long as they respected boundaries, literally and legally. I had no interest in interfering, but every month, without fail, I still received those rent checks, tripled, on time, and my cabin, still there, strong, timeless. A quiet reminder that when you try to tear down a man's home, you better make sure he doesn't own everything around you, because if he does, he might just triple your rent overnight.